Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings. I have a question. Do you rejoice in your sufferings? First, let's talk about sufferings. What is that? Well, there's various kinds of suffering. For example, some Christians have died, martyrs. They've died for their faith. Missionaries, maybe they'll go to another country and the people there kill them. Stephen, he was a preacher that we read about in the Bible, and people hated him. They invented lies about him. Then they secretly instigated men who said, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God." And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and seized him and brought him before the council. And they set up false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases to speak words against this holy place and the law." Stephen, he was the first Christian who was killed for his faith. Then they cast him out of the city and stoned him. People who have died for their faith, they are not the only people who suffer. No, we all suffer. Well, why is that? Sin. Before, there was no suffering. And then sin entered the world through Adam's rebellion. Our world was perfect. Adam rebelled, and our perfect world was turned upside down. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all sinned. Death, that includes everything that's gone askew. For example, losing your job, or your marriage relationship falling apart, bodily pains, many kinds of things that we think are bad. Joni Eareckson Tada, most of you have heard of her. She's a very famous painter. Here's a picture of her. Joni, she has also written many, many books, and she travels around the world speaking. When she was a young girl, she was in a diving accident, and she became a quadriplegic. She's paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Most of us know about Joni, and that she is a very strong Christian who uses her life to inspire others. First, we talked about Stephen from the first century. He suffered terribly. He was stoned to death. Secondly, we talked about Joni. She suffered being paralyzed. These two went through terrible suffering. Question, do we suffer? Of course we do. Most of us suffer at some time in our life. If you're watching this video right now, you might be suffering from something. Perhaps you have an addiction, or it could be another suffering. Perhaps you are a widow and you have young children to raise. Maybe you have bad allergies, could be allergic to something. Suffering comes in many forms. I was just considering that maybe there's some of you who are Christians and you're suffering terribly, and you're comparing yourself to others who suffer a little bit, almost like nothing, and you feel it's not fair. Well, hold on. Remember, our hope is in God's eternal kingdom that is so spectacular. You will feel like what you're going through here is nothing. You will. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. In our next devotion, we're going to look to Scripture, and I'm going to ask you again the question I began this devotion with. Do you rejoice in your suffering? See you next time.